In the last lesson, we looked at how we can better indicate to the browser how we want our page structure to be laid out. Now, page structure is different than presentation because the presentation is done through CSS, through styling. And when we look at the source code, we see that we've got all of this styling information here at the top. This is just a typical website with styling information, so it's all indicated by CSS. And this is what actually contains how that content gets presented. And presentation is different than structure because we want to be able to structure how the code gets laid out, and visually, if we want to have red paragraphs or blue letters, then we would do that within the CSS. So that is how we present the content, and HTML is how we structure it. And having said that, there are ways to actually emphasize some of your content in HTML. So if you wanted something to stand out a little bit more, so if we wanted this hello world to stand out a little bit more, I'm going to shrink this back down to 100%. And let's say I want to use hello world as a title. I want this to stand out. So there's a number of ways to do that. And one of them is we can actually add emphasis or strong, which bolds and emphasizes that piece of content. So I can specify that I want new to be strong. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow it to stand out from the rest of the content of the page. But generally, if you are bolding or if you are making different overall presentation to your content, you're going to be using styling instead. And we're going to talk about how to apply styling briefly within the next few lessons. So this is just a way to emphasize certain words. And we also have another tag, so EM. And this makes it, so this is going to make it italic. And we see that we're back to that same opening and closing tag set up with HTML, where we open and then that content in between, and then we close that up, and whatever is in between these tags gets output within this type of format. So addition to these types of ways to get content to stand out, we also have headings. So we have up to 6 different headings that we can choose from. So all the way from H1 being the largest, and I'll just show you what the difference is between them. So all I did was just a quick copy and paste there, and I'm just going to update these to 3 to 4, and maybe I'll bring this one all the way to 6. So with headings, and the reason for using headings is if you really want something to stand out, then you're going to use headings. So it's putting a lot of emphasis on it. And this is important to remember as well when you are creating your web pages, that headings do matter. So when your browser is rendering this out, it's going to understand that this is important because it's got a heading 1. It's more important than the heading 2 and heading 3. And headings are also used for search and search indexing. So anything with a heading 1 is understood that that's going to be more important content than heading 2. And as well, it's proper structure to start out with the top heading and do subheadings. So if you want to start out with H1 as your most emphasized content, and if you've looked at WordPress or a number of websites, usually they'll do something where they'll have something in a heading. Whenever you go to the web page, we see that we've always got these headings which allow us to quickly understand that this page is features, and then we can, if we're interested in the features, we can read through that. Same with the resources. And here's a good example of using headings. So we've got resources here at the top, and when I do an inspect on that, we can see that so this starts out with the H1, and then the H2 is for those subheadings. H1 is for the main heading. So typically you're going to only use one H1 on the web page, and then all the subheadings or the subsequent headings should be H2, H2, and if I have any additional headings within the H2, then I would go to H3 and so on, so all the way down. And we can see on our own web page when I refresh it that H1 is big, H2 is slightly smaller, H3 smaller again, and then H4 is even smaller. And we can also see that the spacing between them, so it's the same as we're getting within the paragraphs. So we're getting that default top and bottom spacing, and also with the heading, it's taking up that whole block line of code. So everything within this block, it automatically does a return and starts a brand new line with that spacing top and bottom whenever you're using headings. So they function similar to paragraphs, and they help the browser understand how you want your code to be rendered out and how you want it to look. So the takeaway for this lesson is that however we want the page to look, we have to indicate it within the file structure, and providing that appropriate emphasis on wording as we need it. So typically, if you want to bold out, or if you want to bold out an entire paragraph, you might want to use styling instead. And again, it depends on how you want to use particular tagging in HTML. So with the headings, always keep in mind that your structure should be the same as a typical structure, where we start out with the heading 1 and work down from there. And then when you've got paragraphs, if you want to just do a line return, just do the BR. And if you want to emphasize certain words, so sometimes you might want to emphasize a particular phrase or something, or a quote or something like that, you can do the EM. And then strong is if you want to bold out and emphasize certain words so that they're more visible within a paragraph. So maybe if these are some important options that you're using within your page, you might want them to stand out more from other words. We see here on Notepad++, so every time Notepad++ is mentioned, so they've applied some styling for it, but you might also want to just bold it or emphasize it, or update that within your code. So if you were creating this web page, you might want to do it within that type of format instead of applying styling for it every time it's used. And again, a lot of this is up to the discretion of the web developer and web creator, but you should follow basic fundamental principles of the structure. So especially when it comes to headings.